The Forgotten Town. It was a quiet, overcast morning when Emily decided to leave the busy city behind and visit a small, rural town for some peace. She had found a last-minute booking for a bed and breakfast in a place called Hollow Creek, a town she had never heard of but which seemed perfect for a weekend retreat. As Emily drove, the bustling city sounds gradually faded into the distance, replaced by the hum of her car's engine and the endless stretch of road ahead. The weather grew gloomier as she approached her destination. Thick fog began to settle around the area, obscuring the landscape and making her feel like she had driven into a time capsule, a place suspended between now and some forgotten era. She turned off the main highway onto a narrow road that twisted through dense woods. As the trees pressed in on both sides, Emily noticed something odd. There were no signs for Hollow Creek. Not a single road marker, not a tourist board. Just trees and the winding road that seemed to lead nowhere. Minutes later, the road opened up into a clearing. In front of her stood an old, crumbling sign, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," its paint peeling and faded, barely readable. The town beyond it looked abandoned, with buildings that appeared to have been untouched for decades. The B&B was at the far end of town, so Emily decided to drive on. Her curiosity grew with every passing house. The streets were empty, no cars, no people. Windows were dark, some of the houses clearly falling apart. She passed a small cafe, the chairs outside tipped over, and a rusty bicycle chained to a lamppost. At the end of the street stood the bed and breakfast. The house was large and Victorian, though a bit worse for wear. A grand porch stretched across the front, and ivy crawled up the walls. Emily parked in the gravel driveway, slightly unnerved by the isolation but eager to settle in. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. After a few moments, Emily tried the door and found it unlocked. The inside was dark, musty, and smelled of mildew. A few old portraits lined the walls, the faces of people Emily couldn't place, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked past. Finally, she found a woman sitting behind a dusty desk in a dimly lit hallway. She was elderly, with a hunched back and a thin white braid down her back. Her eyes were wide, almost unnervingly so. "You were the guest, I presume?" the woman asked in a soft voice, almost as if she had been expecting Emily.
"Yes, I made a reservation,"
Emily replied, trying to hide her discomfort.
"It's very quiet here. I didn't see anyone else in town."
The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, there are people. But not many stay long." Emily didn't ask what she meant. She just wanted to get to her room and unpack. The woman handed her a key, a heavy iron one, with a strange symbol engraved on the side. She told Emily her room was on the second floor and led her up the stairs, where the floorboards creaked under their weight. When Emily entered her room, she immediately noticed how cold it was. She went over to the window to draw the curtains, but as she looked outside, the fog had thickened, blotting out the world beyond. She shuddered and closed the curtains quickly. That night, she tried to ignore the strange feeling that settled over her. The creaking of the house, the whisper of the wind outside, and the unsettling silence of the town kept her awake. Around midnight, she heard something, footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Emily lay still, listening, her heart pounding. The footsteps stopped at her door. She held her breath, but no one knocked. No one called out. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated down the hall. The next morning, Emily went downstairs to find breakfast, but the dining room was eerily empty. The elderly woman was nowhere to be found, and there was only a plate of toast and jam set at the end of the long table. She ate alone, the silence pressing in on her. Throughout the day, Emily explored the town. She tried talking to the few people she saw, but no one responded to her. They merely stared at her with empty, hollow eyes before turning away. It felt as though the town was ignoring her, pretending she didn't exist. She returned to the B&B that evening, shaken and tired. That night, as she was drifting to sleep, she heard the footsteps again. This time, they were much closer, and they seemed to move with purpose. The sound of soft breathing came from just outside her door, and she could almost feel someone watching her. Emily's heart raced in her chest. She had to know what was going on. She opened the door slowly, just a crack, and peered out into the dark hallway. The air was heavy and cold, and the floor was silent. But then, as she turned to close the door, A voice, low and hoarse, whispered behind her. You shouldn't have come. Emily spun around, but no one was there. She slammed the door shut, but the voice continued to echo in her mind. You shouldn't have come. The following days became a blur. Each time she tried to leave, the fog grew thicker, blurring her path. Each time she returned to the B&B, the woman was there, smiling but offering no explanation. The town seemed to be shifting, the houses no longer familiar, the people no longer human. One night, Emily woke to the sound of scraping. She found the door to her room slightly ajar, and when she stepped into the hallway, it was as if everything had changed. The portraits on the walls now showed strange, distorted faces, twisted, dark-eyed versions of people she had never seen before. The footsteps were louder, more frantic, echoing from the staircase. She ran. She didn't know where to go, but she had to get out. As she reached the front door, she saw the woman standing there, blocking her exit, her eyes wide and unblinking. You're never leaving, Emily, she said, her voice now a croak. Please, Emily begged, I just want to go home. The woman shook her head. You can't leave Hollow Creek. You belong here now. The fog outside thickened, swirling around her like a living thing. The town seemed to pull her back, holding her tight, and in that moment, Emily realized that she had become part of the town's forgotten history. There was no way out. And as the days blurred into one another, Emily's name would join the others, forgotten, lost, a shadow among the whispers in Hollow Creek.